Have you ever found yourself like this standing in the kitchen watching an older relative do something?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like maybe your grandmother or, a great aunt, and they're performing this household chore in a way that just seems, I don't know, unusually specific.
Like they have a very rigid system for it.
Right. Exactly. I'm talking about those tiny kind of idiosyncratic habits.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe she always sweeps the kitchen floor with this very deliberate motion, like pulling the broom toward the center of the room.
Gathering all the dust right in the middle.
Yes. And like absolutely refusing to sweep it out the front door.
Mm.
Or maybe she has this peculiar intensity when she's preparing meat.
Salting it.
Yeah, salting it super aggressively, like she's trying to draw out every last drop of moisture before it even goes near a pan.
It's those little things you just sort of accept growing up.
Exactly. Or perhaps you've noticed, like, this heavy, unexplained silence that descends on the house on a Friday evening.
Right. A sudden stillness.
Yeah, a stillness that just feels entirely disproportionate to whatever's actually happening in the room.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we usually just dismiss these things, don't we?
Oh, totally. We chalk them up to the eccentricities of the older generation.
Right. It's just, the way our family does things.
It is the easiest assumption to make. We categorize those quiet domestic habits as mere quirks.
Yeah.
They're just the background noise of our upbringing. But when you begin to look closely at the mechanics of history, you realize that this background noise is actually, well, it's a transmission.
Like a signal.
Exactly. Those supposedly random household habits are, in many cases, not random at all.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to explore how those tiny, quiet domestic habits you might have witnessed in your own family, how they are actually the lingering physical echoes of a massive historical cover-up.
It really is a massive cover-up.
It is. We're going to decode this 500-year-old survival strategy, one that was like so effective that it essentially erased its own origins.
Which is fascinating.
Right. And to do that, we have to start our journey at the absolute dead center of the Iberian Peninsula. We have to ask a question that seems deceptively simple.
Okay.
Okay. Where is La Mancha?
It sounds like a basic trivia question, right?
Yeah, like something on a middle school geography test.
Exactly. If you ask most people today where or what La Mancha is, they'll immediately conjure up a very specific aesthetic.
Windmills.
Right, windmills. They picture this pastoral, rustic region of Spain, white windmills slowly turning in the breeze, endless fields of scrub, guys on horseback.
Don Quixote vibes.
Totally. But La Mancha is, it's much more than a picturesque backdrop. It is literally a historical cipher.
A cipher.
Yeah, and a geographic trap. And above all, it's a mirror reflecting a deeply hidden lineage that an entire empire spent like centuries trying to systematically erase.
Wow. And, to really understand the people who lived through that erasure, I feel like we first have to understand the ground they were walking on.
Oh, geography dictates behavior.
Completely. You cannot separate the psychology of a culture from the physical terrain they're forced to inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
So let's establish the physical reality of central Spain for a second.
Let's do it.
If I'm standing in the center of Madrid today, and I decide to walk due south, what exactly happens to the world around me?
Well, the first thing you experience is this dramatic, really unforgiving shift in the topography.
Because Madrid is fairly built up, obviously.
Right. But as you leave the dense urban sprawl of the capital behind, the elevation climbs sharply. You are stepping onto the Meseta Central.
The inner plateau.
Yeah, the massive inner plateau of the Iberian Peninsula. It is an immense, windswept, high-altitude tableland.
So it's high up, but flat.
Very flat. You are suddenly incredibly exposed. That there are no soaring mountain ranges immediately breaking the wind,
No valleys to hide in.
Exactly. No deep, lush valleys. The horizon just stretches out in this vast, uninterrupted line.
It sounds like a landscape that offers absolutely no shelter. And the climate is pretty brutal too, right?
Oh, it's extreme.
Because, this isn't the balmy Mediterranean coastline that tourists flock to.
No, not at all. This is an extreme continental climate. We're talking about an environment where, in July, you are subjected to this blinding white sun.
Just baking everything.
Yes, an absolutely scorching heat that bakes the soil into cracked ceramic. And then, the calendar flips.
And then winter hits.
Right. And by January, that exact same landscape is being raked by bitter, freezing winds coming off the distant Sierras.
So it's just punishing. It's a punishing place to try and carve out an existence.
It really is. It is an agricultural landscape, certainly, but it's an agriculture built entirely on defiance.
Defiance and endurance.
Exactly. Visually, it provides that iconic postcard image of Spain, the pale sky, the dusty fields, but living there, actually surviving the elements day in and day out.
It requires a very specific mindset.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And to truly grasp the psychology of the people who forged a life on that plateau, we have to look at the name of the region itself.
Right, La Mancha.
La Mancha.
Which, I mean, it sounds completely thoroughly Spanish.
It really does.
If you don't speak the language, or even if you do, La Mancha just sounds like a traditional Castilian proper noun. But when you start peeling back the linguistic layers, it's different.
Oh, it's very different.
You find that the root of that word doesn't originate in the Spanish language at all, right? It's a direct phonetic descendant of an old Arabic phrase.
Yes. The phrase is al-mansha.
Al-mansha, which translates quite literally to what? The dry land.
Good dry land, yeah. Or, depending on the translation of the ancient texts, even more profoundly, it translates as the land without water.
The land without water.
Yeah.
I want to pause and sit with the gravity of that imagery for a second.
It's heavy.
It is. If you are born into a society situated on a high desert plain, and your society's very name defines it by what it lacks.
By what it desperately needs.
Exactly. Water, the most essential ingredient for life.
Yeah.
How does that shape your collective psyche?
Well, it shapes everything. From your architecture to your philosophy. Surviving in al-mansha meant you quickly learned a very harsh lesson.
Which,
You cannot rely on the surface. The surface is just baked rock.
right.
The surface is harsh wind and scorching sun. So to survive, you have to dig. You have to carve out deep subterranean wells to find the hidden lifelines.
The aquifers.
Exactly. The aquifers buried far beneath that baking crust. So generation after generation, you internalize a profound cultural logic.
That the good stuff is hidden.
Precisely. You learn that whatever is truly valuable, whatever sustains life, must be kept concealed from the elements above.
Wow.
You develop an entire culture predicated on deep concealment, resilience, and looking below the surface.
That makes complete sense. The environment literally forces you into a posture of protection.
Well,
But here's the piece of the puzzle that I think requires some unpacking.
sure.
The Islamic culture that controlled that region and originally named it al-mansha, they eventually receded.
Right, the Reconquista happened.
Yeah, the Reconquista. The Catholic monarchs pushed south, took control of the peninsula, and the Arabic script faded from, like, the public squares and official documents.
It was systematically replaced.
Exactly. So, if the original language and the culture that created the name faded away, how exactly did the incoming Spanish culture adopt the name without adopting its original literal meaning?
Well, what you're looking at here is a phenomenon known as a phonetic handoff.
A phonetic handoff.
Yeah. When the incoming Castilian Spanish culture took control of the territory, they didn't actually rename the land. They simply inherited the phonetic space.
They just kept the sound.
Right. The sound of the word remained exactly the same on the tongue of the new inhabitants, but, words are not static objects.
Right, meaning changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The meaning of that sound morphed dramatically because the language of the people speaking it had changed.
It's like a linguistic hijacking. The physical map retained the sound mancha, but because Arabic was no longer the dominant language, the land without water stopped making literal sense.
It just became a sound to them.
Right, so the 15th and 16th century Castilian speakers unconsciously assigned a new definition to that sound.
They did.
And that new definition didn't just change the map, it kind of turned the map into a weapon.
That is the exact moment where the physical geography transforms into a social trap.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that shift, because this is where the history becomes incredibly dark.
Very dark.
Imagine, like, stepping into a bustling public square, or standing before a judge in a courtroom in Madrid, or maybe sitting in a cathedral in Toledo around the year 1550.
Okay.
If you stand in one of those spaces and you use the word mancha, you are no longer talking about a dry plateau, right?
Not at all.
You're not talking about a topographical feature. What are you actually talking about?
By 1550, if you spoke Castilian, a mancha meant a stain.
A stain.
Yes, it meant a spot. A permanent, inescapable, visible blemish.
A permanent blemish. And that specific concept, the idea of this permanent stain, became the bedrock for, like, one of the most terrifying systems of social engineering in human history.
Absolutely. The ruling class of the Spanish Empire became completely institutionally obsessed with a legal doctrine.
The limpieza de sangre.
Right. The purity of blood decrees.
To understand the sheer weight of these decrees, I feel like you really have to look at the massive demographic upheaval of the era.
Oh, it was unprecedented.
Right, because we're in the period immediately following 1492.
The Alhambra Decree.
Yeah, the decree has been issued. You've had mass expulsions and you've had forced state-mandated conversions on just a massive scale.
Hundreds of thousands of people.
Hundreds of thousands of families with these ancient Eastern lineages, people who had lived on the peninsula for centuries.
Generations.
And they were suddenly faced with a binary choice.
Right.
Leave everything you have ever known or convert to Catholicism and assimilate instantly.
Instantly. And obviously many chose to stay.
They chose survival.
They chose survival, but doing so meant they were instantly thrust into this terrifying new reality where they were legally categorized as new Christians.
New Christians,
Yeah.
with big air quotes.
Right. And the state, as well as their old Christian neighbors, just looked at them with profound suspicion. They were forced into living under this suffocating societal mask.
And their primary strategy for maintaining that mask was camouflage. They had to blend in flawlessly.
Which meant changing their names.
Yeah, this is where we see a massive adoption of the most common standard patronymic surnames available in the empire.
Families literally abandoned their ancestral names.
And they took on names like Garcia, Martinez, Rodriguez, Lopez.
They took the names of their baptismal godparents, or simply chose names so ubiquitous that they acted as a kind of social invisibility cloak.
They were just trying to disappear into the crowd.
Exactly. But the state apparatus, specifically the Inquisition and the regional governments, they were completely paranoid.
They didn't trust this sudden miraculous wave of conversions.
Not for a second. So they institutionalized that paranoia.
With the blood decrees.
Yes. The bureaucracy of the Limpieza de Sangre was suffocating. It became the ultimate glass ceiling, but, with lethal consequences. If you wanted to do anything of consequence in 16th century Spain-like, if you wanted to hold municipal office.
Or become a guild member.
Right, or attend a university, or crucially, if you wanted to get on a galleon and cross the Atlantic to the new colonies.
You had to prove yourself.
You had to submit to a probanza. You had to officially prove, through a grueling genealogical investigation, that you were an old Christian.
So you basically had to prove a negative. You had to prove that you possessed absolutely no trace of the old ways, no Eastern lineage in your bloodline.
Exactly.
But wait, I want to challenge the logistics of this for a moment.
Sure.
We are talking about a time centuries before centralized databases, right?
Long before.
Before Social Security numbers, before digitized census records. If a family really wanted to disappear, if they moved to a new town 300 miles away and simply started calling themselves the Garcias, how exactly did the Spanish bureaucracy enforce this?
It's a great question.
How do you police a bloodline without a modern surveillance state?
Well, that is the most terrifying part of this history.
Yeah.
You don't need digital surveillance when you have weaponized the local population.
Weaponize the neighbors.
Exactly. The Inquisition didn't rely on a massive standing police force. They relied on the familiars, lay people, ordinary citizens who acted as informants. And they relied on a culture of intense, localized espionage.
So they were spying on each other.
Constantly. To get your certificate of blood purity, investigators wouldn't just look at parish baptismal records. They would go to your hometown.
Oh, wow.
They would interview your neighbors, your servants, the people you bought bread from.
They relied on the metadata of daily life.
Precisely. They weren't looking for grand public displays of heresy. They were looking for the minutiae of domestic routine.
The little things.
Yes. The Inquisition published edicts of grace, which were essentially these checklists of suspicious behaviors.
And they read them out to people.
They read them out in church. They were actively training the public on what to look for. They wanted to know, for example, who was scrubbing their house on a Friday afternoon before sundown.
Because in the old ways, the Sabbath begins on Friday evening.
Right.
And the home must be clean before the sun sets.
Exactly. They asked neighbors, hey, have you noticed if this family refuses to use pork fat or lard in their cooking?
Do they strictly use olive oil instead?
Which, again, points directly to ancient kosher dietary laws.
Right, avoiding the pork.
They also asked about sweeping. When they sweep their floors, do they sweep the dust out the front door? Or do they carefully sweep it inward toward the center of the room?
Wait, okay, hold on. Explain the mechanics of the sweeping. Why would sweeping dust out a front door trigger an Inquisition investigation?
Because of the mezuzah. In the ancient hidden lineage, a parchment inscribed with verses from the Torah was often affixed to the doorpost of the home. Right. Out of deep respect for that holy object, one would never sweep dirt, dust, or refuse out the door and across the threshold where the mezuzah rested.
That makes so much sense.
You swept inward, gathering the dirt in the center of the room to be disposed of elsewhere. It was an act of profound religious reverence.
But reduced to a household chore.
Exactly.
That is staggering. The inquisitors were entirely focused on these silent, physical tells.
The very subtle tells.
Sitting by the window and inspecting the evening stars to calculate the start of the Sabbath. Or checking the blade used to slaughter an animal.
They literally weaponized domesticity.
They turned the kitchen and the living room into the front lines of a theological war.
They did. And if the Inquisitors' investigation turned up even a whisper of these habits...
Even a rumor?
Yeah. Or if they found a single documentary link connecting your family back to the old quarters, the consequences were devastating.
You'd lose everything.
You were denied your purity certificate. But worse, your family was permanently marked. You were officially declared to carry a mancha de sangre.
A stain of blood.
A stain of blood.
You became a manchado. You were stained. And, this brings us to this incredibly dark geographical irony.
Yes, the location.
The epicenter of this entire social crisis, the absolute heartland of this bureaucratic terror, was located in one very specific region, Castile-La Mancha.
The stained plain.
The stained plain. The physical geography and the sociological reality become completely inextricably intertwined.
Like a cruel joke.
You have the dry land, al-mansha, populated by thousands of families trying to conceal their hidden wells of identity, and they are living under a legal system that labels them as a mancha, a stain.
And the crown jewel, the administrative beating heart of this region, is the city of Toledo.
Toledo. The duality of Toledo is just... it's one of the greatest tragedies of the era.
It really is. It is the ultimate example of a city turning against its own soul.
Yeah.
For 1,000 years, Toledo was the golden capital of Iberian intellectual life. It was the epicenter of the convivencia.
Right, that period of coexistence.
Exactly, a period where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars worked side by side. It was a place of deep scholarship.
The translation movement.
Yes, the famous translation movement that preserved ancient Greek texts. It was arguably the most cosmopolitan, culturally fluid city in Europe.
But then the political climate shifts, and the infrastructure of that intellectual capital is hijacked.
Violently hijacked. The very same golden city subsequently becomes the absolute headquarters of the Inquisition tribunals in central Spain.
The very place that fostered that knowledge.
The administrative power, the wealth, the central location, everything that made Toledo a beacon of light was repurposed.
Into a machine.
A machine designed to hunt down the descendants of the people who had built it. Toledo became the terrifying, watchful eye of the storm, engineered specifically to expose those with a mancha de sangre.
So let's paint the picture for us here. You have this massive, isolated geographic region, La Mancha. It's a harsh, dry plateau.
Very harsh.
And looming over it, both physically and psychologically, is Toledo. The city where tribunals are actively, ruthlessly hunting for people with stained blood.
The land itself is a trap.
It's a trap. And this is exactly where history and literature collide in a way that most modern readers completely miss.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in 1605, a man named Miguel de Cervantes publishes a novel, Don Quixote de la Mancha.
This is one of the most brilliant, subversive moments in all of literary history.
Really? Subversive?
Completely. If you ask a modern reader about Don Quixote, they will tell you it's this quirky, episodic comedy about an eccentric old man who reads too many books.
Right. He loses his mind and fights windmills.
Because he thinks they are giants. It's viewed as a slapstick satire of medieval chivalry.
Yeah.
But when you place it within the context of the blood decrees, you realize that Cervantes was utilizing an incredibly sophisticated form of literary steganography.
Steganography. He was hiding a massive, dangerous secret in plain sight right there in the text. So how exactly does he code this? What are the mechanisms Cervantes uses to signal this to his readers?
It begins with the title itself and the identity of the protagonist. Cervantes introduces us to an impoverished, obsessive, deeply alienated nobleman.
Right.
He is a man obsessed with old books. A man whose brain has dried up from reading too much ancient text. And Cervantes specifically names him Don Quixote de la Mancha,
From the stain.
from the stain. He explicitly places his hero in a region that is completely, overwhelmingly saturated with families desperately hiding their ancestral roots from the Toledo tribunals just a few miles down the road.
But wait, I feel like a modern reader might say, well, Cervantes was from that area, so we just set the book locally. Why assume it's a code about hidden lineages?
Because of the relentless internal textual clues. It's not just the title.
Okay, what kind of clues?
Well, Don Quixote's real name is Alonso Quijano. The name Quijano was a known converser, a new Christian surname.
Oh, wow.
And Cervantes constantly makes references to Don Quixote's diet, noting he eats duelos y quebrantos on Saturdays.
Which means griefs and breakages.
Yes. And historically, scholars link that dish to the forced consumption of pork by hidden Jews on Saturdays to prove their Christian assimilation.
Oh, that's heavy.
Furthermore, the entire plot of the book is about a man obsessively trying to prove his noble lineage, his chivalric purity, in a world that mocks him.
He is obsessed with his identity and his ancestry.
Exactly.
So he is a man of the stain, obsessing over his bloodline, eating food that signals assimilation, living in the shadow of Toledo. For a reader in 1605, a reader living under the constant paranoid surveillance of the Inquisition, this wasn't a subtle academic theory.
Not at all. For a large segment of his contemporary audience, reading that book was not merely enjoying a comedy.
It was something else.
It was an inside acknowledgement of a shared, unspeakable trauma. By calling him a man of the stain, Cervantes was bypassing the censors.
He was telling his readers that Don Quixote's lineage was under a shadow.
He was marking his protagonist as a man of the hidden blemish. He was putting a mirror up to the psychological prison that the geographic stain had become.
I really want to emphasize the reality of that psychological prison. I mean, just imagine living on that dry, windswept plateau.
It's terrifying.
You're a farmer or a merchant. You are already fighting the scorching heat to grow your crops, fighting the freezing winds just to survive the winter. And looming over the horizon is the bureaucracy of Toledo.
Always watching.
You are trapped in the stain. You cannot trust your neighbors. You cannot cook certain meals without fear that the smell of olive oil instead of lard will betray you.
You can't even sweep your floor.
You can't sweep your own floor without wondering if a familiar of the Inquisition is watching through the window. The mental toll of living in that state of hypervigilance, generation after generation, is unimaginable.
And eventually, human psychology reaches a breaking point. When the pressure in Toledo and La Mancha escalated, when the autos de fe, the public burnings and executions became more frequent and the investigations became more granular, these families realized a heartbreaking truth.
Which was?
They could not outlast the Inquisition. They could not stay in the stain. They had to abandon the physical land they had inhabited for centuries.
Which forces them to deploy the ultimate, most desperate survival mechanism available.
Yeah.
Migration.
They deployed the only option left. Fleeing the reach of the Toledo tribunals, thousands of these stained families made their way to the coast, boarded galleons, and crossed the Atlantic Ocean to the New World.
Okay, but this is where I have a massive logistical question.
Let's hear it.
They are fleeing the Spanish Empire.
Huh?
By moving to the colonies of the Spanish Empire.
Yes.
The Inquisition didn't just stay in Europe. They established a tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition in Mexico City, in Lima, in Cartagena.
They brought the whole machine with them.
They brought the entire bureaucracy with them. So how does migrating actually solve the problem if the same authorities own the land you are fleeing to?
It is a critical question, and the answer lies in the sheer scale of the frontier.
The geography again.
Exactly. You are entirely correct. The Inquisition set up shop in the major colonial capitals. If a hidden family moved to the center of Mexico City or Havana, they would eventually be subjected to the exact same surveillance they faced in Toledo.
Right.
So they didn't stop in the capitals. They used the vast, untamed geography of the New World as a shield. They moved to the absolute fringes of the empire.
They pushed to the edges of the map where the bureaucracy couldn't physically sustain itself.
Exactly. They migrated to the rugged, inaccessible mountains of the interior Puerto Rico.
Far from the ports.
Right. They moved to the isolated rural islands of Cuba and Hispaniola. They pushed into the harsh northern frontier deserts of Mexico, specifically Nuevo León.
Into the desert.
And eventually, they traveled up the Camino Real into the deep, geographically isolated valleys of New Mexico and southern Colorado.
The Sangre de Cristo Mountains.
Yes.
They put oceans and then deserts and then mountain ranges between themselves and the Inquisitors. In these frontier towns, the local priest might only visit once every 6 months, right?
Exactly. The administrative oversight was practically non-existent compared to Toledo.
So it was a massive, quiet diaspora. They took those defensive, protective surnames, the Garcias, the Martinez, the Riberas, and they literally vanished into the wilderness.
They did. And because they were so desperate to avoid the attention of the authorities, they became outwardly hyper-Catholic.
Oh, to overcompensate.
They became the most integrated, the most traditional pillars of these new frontier communities.
But this is where the history transitions, right?
Yes.
From a story of geographic escape to a story of profound generational tragedy.
Yes.
Because while they succeeded in escaping the physical tribunals, they instituted a code of silence so absolute that it ended up erasing their own history.
They spent the next 500 years trying to wash out the Mancha.
Wash out the stain.
The original refugees who crossed the ocean, they knew exactly who they were. They knew why they swept the floor a certain way, why they lit lamps in the closet on Friday nights.
But they couldn't talk about it.
They knew that telling their children the truth was practically a death sentence. If a young child accidentally blurted out a secret to a passing priest.
The entire family could be dragged back to Mexico City and burned.
Exactly. So you have parents who must teach their children the survival behaviors without ever explaining the reason for the behavior.
The context was simply too dangerous to speak aloud.
And over the course of centuries, the why was completely lost. But the physical memory, the actions, the chores, the habits remained.
The culture became a phantom history.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. Children inherited the protective actions of their parents and grandparents, assuming it was just, what our family does.
It is the ultimate manifestation of cultural muscle memory.
It really is.
You perform a protective action for 500 years. But because the memory of the threat is gone, you forget that you are protecting yourself. The action just becomes your culture.
The chore itself is the culture.
Right. Let's look at the mechanics of some of these specific orphaned customs that survived in these isolated New World valleys. We mentioned salting meat earlier. Why was that so vital and how did it survive?
Well, the aggressive salting of meat is a direct remnant of kosher law,
Okay.
specifically the Levitical prohibition against consuming blood. To make meat kosher, it must be soaked and heavily salted to draw out all the remaining blood.
And so they kept doing this in the New World.
Yes. In the mountains of New Mexico or Puerto Rico, mothers continued to rigorously salt and rinse their meat, teaching their daughters to do the same.
But if they didn't know why,
Yeah.
what did they tell them?
If asked why, the answer was simply, it makes the meat taste better, or it keeps it from spoiling.
The theological reason was gone.
But the chemical process remained completely intact.
That is amazing. The sources also mention lighting candles in the back rooms on Friday nights.
Lighting the Sabbath candles.
Right.
In Spain, an Inquisition familiar would walk down the street on a Friday evening looking for the glow of candlelight escaping through shutters.
Trying to catch them observing the Sabbath.
Exactly. So families began lighting their Sabbath candles in the interior rooms, in closets, or inside clay pots where the light couldn't be seen from the street.
To hide the flame.
And fast forward 300 years to a ranch in Colorado, and a grandmother is still lighting a candle in a back bedroom on Friday night.
Wow. There are also customs surrounding death and mourning, right? Turning the faces of the mirrors to the wall when someone dies.
Yes, that is a direct survival of the Jewish mourning period of Shiva, where mirrors are covered so the mourners do not focus on their physical appearance.
And the direction they faced when buried.
There was the practice of turning the face of the deceased toward the wall, or burying them facing east toward Jerusalem rather than facing the altar of the local church.
And checking the eggs for blood spots. Checking the olive oil with an intensity that seems completely disproportionate.
All of it.
All of these ancient Levitical laws, stripped of their theology, continuing purely on the momentum of habit. I mean, it raises an incredibly profound question for the descendants of these families living today.
It's a huge question.
How do you begin to separate a quirk of your family from a survival tactic of an ancient lineage?
That is the incredibly complex emotional landscape that thousands of descendants are navigating today.
I can't even imagine.
When a family has carried these habits across oceans, from the arid, punishing plateau of La Mancha to the tropical humidity of the Caribbean to the high-altitude deserts of the American Southwest, they were running incredibly far.
Running for generations.
And they were doing it just to protect a hidden spark.
The physical contrast is just stunning. You go from the dry, white sun plateau of La Mancha, this land without water, to the lush green mountains of Cuba.
Totally different worlds.
The external environment changed completely. But the internal landscape, the hidden stark, the muscle memory of the ancestors, stayed exactly the same. The geography shifted, but they just kept sweeping the floor toward the center.
And that brings us directly to the present day. Because this is not a dormant, dusty piece of academic history.
No, it's alive.
The ink of this story is bleeding through the page right now. The descendants of these hidden lineages are beginning to ask questions.
They're finding out.
They are beginning to sequence their DNA, research their genealogical roots, and look at their family habits with a new, critical lens.
Let's synthesize all the geographic, historical, and sociological threads we have unspooled today.
Let's do it.
We started in a land without water. We watched how a phonetic sound mancha was hijacked and turned into a social death sentence.
Right.
We saw thousands of families forced to wear a mask, forced to carry the legal label of a stain, and forced to flee to the edges of the earth to survive.
But look closely at what that stain actually represents today.
What do you mean?
The tribunals, the Inquisition, the Empire, they wanted those ancestors to believe that a forced signature on a baptismal font could completely, retroactively erase an ancient lineage.
They wanted to wipe them out.
They wanted the mancha, the blemish, to be a source of deep intergenerational shame. They wanted it to be a mark of impurity.
But the profound irony is that the stain they were meant to be ashamed of is actually a seal.
Exactly. It is a seal. It is unbroken proof of who they are. It is the evidence of their survival.
Wow.
The dry land, al-mansha, the land without water. It turns out it actually does yield water. The lifelines are still there, but only if you're willing to dig deep enough beneath the surface to find them.
Which is why I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Because it is entirely possible that you are listening to this right now, and you have spent your entire life feeling like a bit of a stranger in your own cultural house.
It's very possible.
Maybe you grew up in a Catholic or secular Hispanic family in the American Southwest, or Latin America, or the Caribbean. But you have always felt this strange, inexplicable gravity pulling you toward ancient Jewish texts, or toward the history of the conversos, or, toward a narrative that doesn't quite match the official, straightforward story you were told in Sunday school.
If you feel that pull.
If you feel that pull, you might be feeling the pull of the plane.
The silence instituted by those ancestors worked for 5 centuries. It was absolutely necessary.
It saved them.
It kept those families safe from the tribunals, and it ensured the survival of the bloodline. But the tribunals are gone. The Inquisition is gone.
It's over.
The necessity of that silence has expired. Its time is up.
So here is our call to action for you. Take a closer look at your own family.
Look at the details.
Look at your surnames. Look at the unique, unexplained traditions that your family practices. Go talk to the older generation, your grandparents, your great-aunts and uncles.
Ask them the hard questions.
Ask them about those quiet domestic habits, the things they do without ever explaining why. Ask them why they check the olive oil with such scrutiny, or why they sweep the floor a certain way, or why they refuse to point at the stars.
Don't let them brush it off as just a quirk.
Because the clues to a massive, hidden historical epic might be waiting right there on your kitchen floor.
The map, with all its geographic traps and phonetic shifts, has brought you right back to the beginning. The history isn't lost.
It was just waiting to be decoded.
Waiting to be decoded.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as we conclude. Consider the ultimate breathtaking irony of how this specific lineage managed to survive against the greatest bureaucratic machine of the 16th century.
It's incredible.
Think about this. If these ancestors had written down their actual identities in books, or if they had kept official journals of their true heritage and theology, the Inquisition familiars in Toledo would have easily found those documents.
They would have.
And they would have burned the documents and burned the families along with them. But they didn't write it down.
No, they didn't.
By hiding their deepest, most dangerous truths inside the most mundane, unwritten, unremarkable domestic chores, sweeping a floor, checking an egg, salting a piece of meat, they effectively made their history fireproof.
Fireproof.
The Inquisition was aggressively looking for documents, but the ancestors hid the truth in muscle memory.
It is an act of quiet domestic genius. An empire can burn a book, but they cannot burn a habit that a mother teaches a daughter in the quiet sanctuary of a kitchen.
Exactly. The mundane became immortal. So as you go about your week, ask yourself, what seemingly ordinary daily habit of your own might secretly be a 500-year-old act of defiance?
It's a great question.
Keep reading between the lines. Keep searching the horizon. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.